everybody. Breaking news now from overnight. President Trump has reached the critical point of this trip. He's in Beijing right now, sitting down with the Chinese president, mixing praise and tough talk, urging Beijing to do more to rein in its neighbor, North Korea. Trade is on the line as well there. Good morning, everybody. Big day today. I'm Bill Henry.
Good morning. What a week.
Yeah, indeed it is.
All right, good morning, Bill. I'm Sandra Smith. President Trump making the most of his time in Beijing, criticizing the U.S. trade relationship with China as one-sided and unfair. The president also prodding China to do more to isolate North Korea.
As long as we stand together with others, if necessary, against those who threaten our civilization, that threat will never happen. It doesn't even have a chance. The entire civilized world must unite to confront the North Korean menace. And the entire world is watching us right now.
Team Fox coverage on this Thursday morning. Republican Congressman Adam Kinzinger is here. But first, we go to Chief White House Correspondent John Roberts, traveling with the president in Beijing. Good morning to you, John.
Sandra, good evening to you from Beijing. The big headline out of the summit between President Trump and President Xi is that the United States and China are on the same page that North Korea cannot be allowed to possess nuclear weapons. They are a little behind the curve, though, because North Korea already has nukes. So now the task is to try to wind that program back. In a press briefing that occurred early in the morning, New York time, the Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said that China has agreed to take more steps to implement United Nations sanctions against North Korea, putting the squeeze on its economy by limiting oil exports to North Korea, as well freezing bank accounts. Yesterday, speaking with President Xi at a summit of U.S. and Chinese business leaders, President Trump tried a little honey instead of vinegar to get Xi to move. Listen here.
The United States is committed to the complete and permanent denuclearization of North Korea. So important. China can fix this problem easily and quickly. And I am calling on China and your great president to hopefully work on it very hard. I know one thing about your president. If he works on it hard, it will happen. There's no doubt about it.
Little flattery there. Again, some honey to try to get him to move, as opposed to, really kind of criticizing China for not doing more. Secretary of State Tillerson said that while there is no daylight between the United States and China over whether North Korea can have nuclear weapons, there is some disagreement over tactics and timing. So we'll see how that all shakes out going forward, Sandra.
And John, the president had some strong words on the U.S. trade relationship with China.
He did, and he was quite frank about the fact that the U.S. Trade deficit with China, which stood at $347 billion in 2016, and the president says is likely higher now, really is a travesty, and as the president said, is unsustainable. There was a bit of an unusual moment yesterday as well at that business leaders luncheon, where the president, who during the campaign had accused China of, quote, raping the American economy, suddenly started praising Xi Jinping for taking advantage of the United States on trade. Listen here.
I don't blame China. After all, who can blame a country for being able to take advantage of another country for the benefit of its citizens? I give China great credit. But in actuality, I do blame past administrations for allowing this out-of-control trade deficit to take place and to grow.
Rectifying the trade deficit between the United States and China is something that's not going to be done overnight. It's going to take years if it can ever really be rectified totally. Some faster movement might be possible on the opioid crisis in the United States. The president was very frank with President Xi that China has to stop dumping precursor drugs into the United States. So there was some agreement on that, at least to rein in precursor drugs for fentanyl, and also take greater action here in China to crack down on people who are illegally producing drugs and then shipping those to the United States. One other point, the president heads tomorrow to Vietnam. We're actually headed there tonight to the APEC conference. Still no decision on whether or not he is going to meet with Vladimir Putin. The Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said they want to make sure that they've got something substantive to talk about, Sandra, before they agree to meet.
So we'll see where that goes. John Roberts, thank you.
A lot to analyze here. Illinois Congressman and Republican Adam Kinzinger, member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, with me from the Hill. And, sir, good morning to you.
Morning.
You just heard that information from John Robert. He went after China during the campaign. In person, though, the language is a lot softer. Are you okay with that?
Yeah, I am. I had lunch a week ago with the president before his trip, and he was kind of talking about where he was going to go, what were the issues. I was glad to hear him discuss the opioid issue because China plays a huge role in that, especially when it comes to fentanyl. And the president's really good at, on the one hand, saying bold things publicly, but then privately saying, hey, how do we work together? And I think that's part of his deal-making art, if you will, or the way he makes deals. And so, I think the president doesn't hold back on being tough when he needs to. But at the same time, saying to the Chinese, hey, really good job taking advantage of the U.S. economy isn't really complimenting China. It's kind of a backhanded way to say, yeah, I guess you're doing what you need to do, but we're watching you now. And we're going to fix that.
Let's see what he gets from that. Now, on the issue of North Korea, there are 3 aircraft carriers in the Pacific right now for the first time in decades. What do you think as a country we get out of that show of strength and a message toward North Korea and perhaps the others in the Asian region?
Well, it's massive. It's gunboat diplomacy. It's at the time the president is there, we're saying, look, we have 3 aircraft carriers here, which is a massive amount of firepower, by the way. 1 aircraft carrier group is a massive amount of firepower. 3 is insane. And we could actually put more there if we needed to, plus land-based attack aircraft and everything else. I think the message really is to China. It's to say, if we commence a strike against North Korea, we will win. There's no doubt about that. No military analyst has said that we're going to lose that. And the end result, while the casualties would be massive, if you're looking at just the geopolitical play to China, the end result of that is U.S. influence in the region right on your doorstep grows massively because we'll have a unified Korean peninsula under an American or South Korean type style regime. And that's got to be frightening if you're the Chinese because, the Chinese don't take the casualties as personally as we do. That's something very significant when we're thinking about commencing a military action. They don't. They just think geopolitically. And geopolitically, if they don't rein in North Korea and we do a strike and we end the North Korean regime, this is really bad news for China.
It's a very interesting point on Beijing, and I agree with you on that. Now, maybe a meeting tomorrow with Vladimir Putin. We'll find out from the State Department in an interview 35 minutes from now. With regard to domestic matters here at home, this horrific shooting in Texas, you're a pilot for the Air National Guard, right? And Pentagon guidelines require the arrest history to be entered into a database or a history for everyone for whom it applies. That did not happen here.
Right.
James Mattis and others want answers. And how do you get them to make sure this doesn't happen again?
So the Pentagon, we love our military. I'm in the military. I love the military. But the Pentagon is a big bureaucracy. And stuff like this falls through the cracks too much. In fact, I had to deal with an issue where a pilot was falsely accused of something, and they never removed his criminal history, and he couldn't even get a bank loan for a house. And we had to work through to get that fixed. So on the one hand, they put too much in, and on the other hand, they're not doing anything. This has got to be fixed on all levels, whether it's a local state jurisdiction to put this necessary criminal information into NCIS, the Criminal Investigation Background System, so that the people that shouldn't be buying guns should not buy guns, and the people that are law-abiding citizens should be allowed their Second Amendment right.
Yeah. Adam Kinzinger, thank you for your time.
You bet, anytime.
Such a tragedy, too, and when you get the after effect of all this, it's equally shocking. Sir, thank you. More on the president's trip, as I mentioned a moment ago. Possibility of this meeting tomorrow with the Russian President, Vladimir Putin. In moments here, we'll talk to the State Department spokeswoman, Heather Nauert, live out of Washington, D.C., so stay tuned on that. Coming up shortly.
And the House Ways and Means Committee expected to finish its markup of the GOP tax bill today. House Republicans say they expect the bill to clear that committee. And once that's done, the Senate will unveil its own tax legislation later today. The big question will be, will those 2 bills square up? And we will have new reaction to all of this from top Republican lawmakers, including Speaker Paul Ryan, who Bill just spoke with.
White House give you guidelines for this tax bill? Are you working within parameters that satisfy the White House as opposed to what would satisfy you? Because I know you went to Congress as an acolyte of Jack Kemp.
That's right.
And I'm thinking you've lived your entire political life waiting for the opportunity for substantial tax reform, going back to 1986 and Ronald Reagan.
I'm very pleased with this product. Look, this is far more bold tax reform than the 86 tax reform that Ronald Reagan did.
We will have much more on that interview with Speaker Paul Ryan next hour. But first, we'll also talk with Florida Senator Marco Rubio.
It's a big day, and we get into a lot of matters, too, here. And depending on how you slice it, you can figure out for yourself at home. Is it good for you or not? Is it good for your company or not? We'll find
Something that affects everyone, that's for sure.
No question. Meanwhile, other big stories today. Former DNC Chair Donna Brazile owning up to her own Tucker Carlson about claims that she gave candidates debate questions in advance during the campaign. She said this last night.
And I know WikiLeaks gave everybody, certain questions and certain emails. What I sought to do, Tucker, was to ensure that we had these issues on the table, and I made sure that our candidates, I didn't want them blindsided.
Well, now we wonder if her story's changing. Brazile also speaking with us about the problems she says she saw across the DNC inside Hillary Clinton's campaign, so our panel will take that up in a moment. Plus, there is this today.
Faith is the antidote to fear and despair. Faith is now and always has been our source of strength and the summit of our national life. And I believe that faith has never been more important to the future of America.
Vice President Mike Pence offering prayers and praise as he meets with victims and first responders in the wake of that church shooting down in Texas. More on his message coming up.
And how is Senator Rand Paul doing today?
Wow. I think he's seen better days.
Man, he gives an update on his condition after mowing the lawn, attacked by his neighbor at his home in Kentucky. Stay tuned.
And when he's coming back to work. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul giving an update on his condition yesterday, tweeting this. I appreciate all the support from everyone. A medical update. Final report indicates 6 broken ribs, and new x-ray shows a pleural effusion. Ooh. All right. That's a buildup of fluid around the lungs, for those of us who don't know. An aide for Paul originally said he suffered 5 broken ribs and bruised lungs when his neighbor attacked him outside his home in Bowling Green, Kentucky last week. That neighbor, Renee Boucher, was charged with assault. He's out of jail now on a $7,500 bond, and he'll be returned to work next week, we're told.
Sounds like it hurts.
I come from the school, Tucker, that you actually knock on doors, you talk to people, you try to get their support, and then you try to get them out on election day. Robbie comes from a school that is a lot different than the school I came from. They do algorithms, they do data modeling. It was dismissive. Condescending and dismissive. And I wanted the campaign to understand that we needed yard signs. We needed radio spots.
Really interesting interview. Former DNC Chair Donna Brazile with Tucker last night, her take on how the Clinton campaign got it wrong. Well, Doug Schoen, former advisor to President Bill Clinton, Jonah Goldberg, senior editor of National Review, and both are Fox News contributors. Gentlemen, I'm a bit confused today because I've known her for a long time. I thought, Doug, she owned up to the debate issue a year ago, and now it seems like she's backtracking on this.
Well,
so what are we left to believe here?
Well, I don't know what to believe. I do know that the Democratic Party itself rots from the head down. I mean, they won a big victory. I think it was in large part a repudiation Tuesday of Donald Trump. But for today, let's be clear. Hillary Clinton, according to Donna Brazile, tried to rig the nomination financially and in terms of message. Donna Brazile has acknowledged giving debate questions. Last night she's saying she was leaking inappropriately, apparently, to Bernie Sanders and to Martin O'Malley.
I've got that clip in a moment. Go ahead and finish.
And then you got Bernie Sanders, who had quit the primaries before California and was negotiating for speaking fees and airline seats. So I'm really disgusted. I think you got to clear them all out.
Sounds to me like she's all over the board. Let me play the clip in a moment. Jonah, just go weigh in on what you heard from last night.
Yeah, well, I don't know, it seems to me that Festivus is here a little early this year. I think that, Donna clearly is settling some scores. I agree with Doug that she is sort of all over the map. She came out of the box, originally swinging, saying that she helped that Hillary had rigged the election, and now she's kind of backtracking a little on the rig claim and on this question stuff. But I look at this more sociologically. Donna Brazile, who I've also known for a very long time, and I like her personally, for her to do this, the one thing that you can conclude from this, regardless of how much you want to fact check her story, is that this is a sign that she thinks the Clinton era is over. And that the future of the party is the sort of the Sanders wing and that kind of thing.
Jonah, you were the one who said that from the first hour when the leaks on this book came out. You were the one who
Yeah.
said that. Now listen, I want to. It's a quick clip, but listen carefully to how the story seems to be expanding now with regard to this debate issue. Watch.
WikiLeaks sought to divide us. These were active measures where you got to see the things I gave to Hillary. You never got a chance to see the things I gave to Bernie or Martin O'Malley.
Now, Doug, that's the point you're saying. She said WikiLeaks sought to divide us. You saw what I gave Hillary. You did not see what I gave to Bernie and O'Malley. Well, what are we left to think about that?
Well, I think we're left to think is that she was playing all sides against the middle, that she was not dealing basically straight off the top of the deck. And, you know, I really think that this shows her in a worse and worse light, no matter what it shows about Hillary, and it sure doesn't show Hillary looking any better. So I agree with Jonah. The Clinton era is over. The Donna Brazile era is over. We move forward in a different direction.
Well, I'm wondering, Jonah, this kind of bounces back to CNN in a way. Because if you're doing debate prep with all these national implications on the line, I know how we do it here. We're in a quarantine, and there is nobody in and nobody out. And if you've got the questions, they are not distributed. And she's leaving us the impression that she had access to something, whether it was topics or specific questions, and gave them to all three candidates last year.
Yeah, that's. I mean, so again, I look at it from that perspective of she is trying to telegraph to people that she wasn't trying just to help Hillary. She was also trying to help Bernie, because I think she thinks that the Bernie wing of the party is ascendant and she wants to get in their good graces. So that's the audience that I think she's appealing to when she says something like this. Whether it's true or not, I don't know. But I agree with you. This is really a much bigger problem for CNN, you know, because it shows that within CNN there was this sort of duplicity at work. I've never thought that giving Hillary Clinton a single heads up that there might be a question about the death penalty was one of these world historical events like Lenin visiting Finland Station. I mean, it was that one brief moment in the campaign, but from the journalistic side, it was a problem for CNN, and I think CNN did the right thing when they severed with Donna.
Doug, quickly on that.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, I've been in campaigns. You always want to get leaks of questions. And frankly, in my experience, we never got them. And we sure were as careful as I know Fox News to be.
I think, sorry, I cut you off there.
No, and I was going to say there are questions for CNN, Bernie, Hillary, and Martin O'Malley to answer, as well as the Democratic Party. And I say this as a loyal Democrat.
That's the point, because there's another phase in this story that yet to go public.
Correct.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Joan. Enjoy Festivus.
Absolutely.
Soon among us.
I got a lot of problems with you people.
It's on the record. All right, Vice President Mike Pence offering comfort to a community in mourning as we continue to search for answers in that horrific church shooting.
The days are evil, as Governor Abbott just said. Faith tells us we overcome evil with good.
More on his visit as the investigation continues into the Texas church massacre. Also, banning the national anthem, why one group is pushing to replace the Star-Spangled Banner. Vice President Mike Pence traveled to Texas to meet with survivors, heroes, and first responders from Sunday's massacre in Sutherland Springs. Mr. Pence telling the town, "We are with you." He also praised their perseverance.
Faith is stronger than evil. No attack, no act of violence will ever break our spirit or diminish the faith of the American people.
Brian Yennis is live outside First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, the site of Sunday's deadly rampage. Brian, the vice president, also took part in that vigil.
Good morning, Sandra. That's right. The Vice President spoke to hundreds at the local high school football stadium. He was there speaking to the folks there that had come really to grieve with the Vice President. At the vigil, some of the families were in attendance, including Frank Pomeroy, the church pastor, and his wife, Sherry. They were not inside the church at the time of the shooting, but their 14-year-old Annabelle Pomeroy was. She died. Stephen Wolford, the hero Good Samaritan that stopped the gunman, also in attendance at last night's vigil. The Vice President, accompanied by the Texas Governor Greg Abbott and Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General, spoke to the grieving community about the power of faith.
The Bible tells us that the Lord is close to the brokenhearted. That will be our prayer for you. from this day forward. The good people of Sutherland Springs have taught the nation this week faith is the antidote to fear and despair.
Just a few hours before the vigil, there were reports of a gunman, an active shooter in the same town as the vice president. Police searched for 2 hours and ended up finding nothing. It was a false report, but just give you an idea of the kind of tension here. By the way, the vice president vowing to get down to the bottom as to why this gunman was able to get those guns in the first place, given his criminal background. Sandra?
And Brian, we now officially know the names of all the victims.
It took days. It's a complicated crime scene. It took days for investigators to identify and notify the families of these loved ones. These are the faces of the children, the grandparents, the couples of those who died inside. 26, 20 wounded. It's hard to find anybody in this town of 400 that wasn't affected or knew somebody that was affected by this. Among the killed, 8 children, the most children killed in a mass shooting since Sandy Hook in 2012. Right here in front of the church, there are now crosses with the names of the victims. Haley Kruger, who was killed when her mother dropped her off to make breakfast at the church. She was 16, and all of the Holcombs, 8 members of the Holcomb family, including 4 children and an unborn child. These crosses were dropped off by a carpenter from Illinois, the same man, Greg Zanis, who dropped off those 58 crosses just a month ago in Las Vegas.
Wow.
Sandra?
Wow, what a story. Brian Yanis, thank you for covering it for us.
This breaks your heart. More on that. As we continue to learn more about those attacks and the victims, FBI officials are working to unlock the suspect's encrypted cell phone to find out what clues might be inside. Homeland Security Chair Mike McCall in a moment here on that national debate. Coming up.
Plus, House Republicans forging ahead on their tax reform bill. But could the Senate's version of the bill derail the whole process? We'll ask Florida Senator Marco Rubio.
This is the way you do legislation. Tax reform is hard. That's why it hasn't been done in 25 years. But it's not a clash. It's the way this thing works, you know. And in the end, I am confident. I really am very cautiously optimistic that we are going to get a result here.
9:32. We are awaiting a hearing now, a detention hearing in Washington, D.C. One of the suspects in the Benghazi attacks, U.S. commandos captured Mustafa al-Imam more than a week ago in Libya. Now, the Justice Department has not yet described what role he played in the attack of 2012, but the charges include providing support to terrorists. The person who allegedly planned the attack is now on trial in Washington, D.C. as well.
Republicans bracing for a fight over tax reform. The House Ways and Means Committee was supposed to continue marking up their bill right now, but we are now hearing that process has been delayed for the time being. Meanwhile, Senate Republicans are preparing to unveil its own legislation later today, and their version reportedly contains some big differences. Earlier, I spoke to Florida Senator Marco Rubio about all of that. Senator Rubio, thank you for being here this morning. So it's obviously setting up to be a big week, a big morning. We're set to see the details in the Senate plan. Can you give us any hints as to what is in that?
Well, we're going to learn a lot more about it ourselves. They kept a pretty tight hold on it till this morning. And of course, we're not voting on anything today. It's just the beginning of the process. It's the first step. It's like the opening offer. And it'll be different from the House. One of the things I know that'll be different is the state and local taxes exemption. You know, in Florida, when I do my taxes, I get to write off my property tax, a portion of the sales tax if you're itemizing. And a lot of people are upset about that, but that it's going to go away. But what really matters is how much do you pay at the end of the day? When you do your taxes, how much do you pay? And so while that may be going away, there are other things that are going up. And the combination of those two changes is going to lead most, if not the vast overwhelming majority of Americans who need a tax cut are going to get one. So in the end, does it really matter how you get the tax cut in terms of what deductions you're able to take, or what matters most of all, how much are you paying? Because I think that's what people care about at the end of the day, is how much are they paying in taxes when it's all said and done.
So is it fair, Senator, to say that the Senate, the details of the Senate plan will be drastically different than the House?
Well, I don't know. That's in the eye of the beholder. It'll be different, but that's not abnormal. It's a funny thing around here. You know, if they kind of put a deal together behind closed doors and then tell everybody take it or leave it, then they criticize it for being a closed process. But if you do it the way it's supposed to be done, which is you have to start somewhere. This is the starting point. there may be things in it I want to change. If the child tax credit is not high enough or it's not refundable, I'll want to change that because I think we have to do that for working families, people out there that are raising 2, 3, 4 children. Both parents work really hard. We can't raise their taxes. They need a tax cut. It's expensive to raise kids.
And I know that's something that you've been extremely passionate about. You wrote an op-ed over the weekend. The New York Times published it, in which you call for at least doubling the per-child tax credit to $2,000 and making it refundable against payroll tax liability, the biggest tax paid, you say, by working-class American families. You go on to say the House tax bill released last week falls short in this regard. So will we see that, specifically that number, show up in the Senate plan?
Well, I don't know if they'll get to that number, but I think it'll be better. I expect it'll be better than the House position, and we'll keep working on it. Look, if I don't like it, I can file an amendment on the Senate floor, and I'm pretty confident I have the votes. And by the way, 2,000 is not some number out of the air. That is the point in which you're giving a tax cut to people who will have more than 2 children or 3, have 3, 4 children, are raising a family, are working, because you can't get this if you're not working. Here's what I can tell you. It cannot be that it is more lucrative to not work and raise 4 kids with the government benefits that come with that than it is to take a job for $35,000 a year. That can't be, and our tax code should not encourage that.
Yeah, and I think the concern of the average American right now is they saw the details of the House plan. We're waiting on the Senate. They see the slicing and dicing and the changes that are happening, and they wonder if this truly will be the generational tax reform that President Trump promised.
Well, it will be if we can grow the economy and we can leave more money in people's pockets. I mean, that's the bottom line. You know, we have to grow the economy. We have to. Not only do we need more jobs, but we need jobs to pay more. It's not just enough to create jobs. Those jobs have to pay more. To do that, we have to wake up and understand that we are engaged in a global competition. All these other countries are cutting their taxes and getting rid of their regulations so that businesses will create jobs over there instead of here. And we've waited for 25 years. We've kind of languished in that competition, and the people watching this are the ones that are hurting. And so while the price keeps going up on everything, their paychecks haven't grown.
There's reports this morning that, based on what we know so far, that this is setting up for a big clash between House and Senate Republicans. Do you see it that way?
I don't see it as a clash. This is the way you do legislation. Tax reform is hard. That's why it hasn't been done in 25 years. But it's not a clash. It's the way this thing works, you know. And in the end, I am confident. I really am very cautiously optimistic that we are going to get a result here.
All right. So this is one of many aggressive items on the agenda happening this week. You sit on the Foreign Relations Committee. Senator Rubio, the president's been traveling this big trip to Asia, 11 days abroad, possible meeting with Putin coming up. How do you think the president's doing over there?
I think it's been a good trip from everything I've seen. And obviously, I have some disagreements with him about China. I don't think that what the Chinese president pulled off was a great political victory. I find that, you know, he's a dictator. And it's easy to win when no one can run against you. But it's an important relationship. But by and large, I think it's been an important trip for the president to take, you know, to reassure our allies in South Korea and in Japan, to show that America is a Pacific power and that we're not going away. This is a really important trip, and so far it looks like it's gone quite well.
If I could get the latest on what's happening down with this investigation happening in Texas. We are still waiting to hear on a definitive motive of that shooter killing those people in that small town church. We now know that they have the phone in their possession, but they cannot get into the phone. Is this a problem that perhaps Congress needs to be looking at, getting access in instances like this to find out more?
And we've tried to figure out ways to do it. You know, it's the manufacturers of these devices that, you know, put in these encrypted passcodes, and it's very difficult to break them. They were able to do it in the past. But I think eventually investigators will get access to what they need to get access to. It's a terrible tragedy. We'll learn more about it, and we'll see if there's anything that can be done, particularly in the mental health realm. But the one thing to take away from it is this was a breakdown of the system. All these people calling for background checks. Background checks are not perfect, especially if the information on the background is not inputted.
All right, it's going to be a big day. Any predictions for what the 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time hour looks like, Senator Rubio?
Well, I think there's a lot of people interested to see a lot of details, and it's the beginning. I would say it's going to be a good starting point. We have a lot of work to do, but this is perhaps the most important thing we've done here in Washington in over a decade.
Senator Rubio, we really thank you for coming on this morning. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
And there's more. Next hour, House Speaker Paul Ryan making his case for why this plan should go forward. Really interesting interview with Marco Rubio, though, Senator.
Thank you, and I look forward to yours with Paul Ryan. It's so much
to talk about
here.
Yeah, you're exactly right. A lot at stake for the Republican majority and for so many folks at home, too. In the meantime, it happened, folks. Yes, it did last night.
China can fix this problem easily and quickly And I am calling on China and your great president to hopefully work on it very hard.
Well, President Trump in China moments ago there, cranking up the pressure on Beijing to crack down on North Korea. This is the centerpiece of the meeting in China and really an important point for this entire trip. The other big issue in China is all about trade, which was prominent during the campaign last year. State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert, former colleague of ours here, and now she has moved on to the next chapter in her life. Thanks for making time for us. And
hi, Bill. Great to see you.
Welcome here to America's Newsroom. You as well. The Russians are saying Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump will meet tomorrow in Vietnam. Is that the case?
Well, we don't have anything fixed on the schedule just yet. That is a possibility. Usually when we schedule these things, there are set meetings. This is not a set meeting. It could be a pull-aside. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson spoke to this last evening, our time, in which he said, look, if there's something useful that we can have a conversation with Russia about, we may go about doing that. A couple areas that we are looking for assistance with Russia. One would be on this issue of North Korea. They signed on to UN Security Council 2 rounds of sanctions against North Korea. Is Russia willing to do more with our maximum pressure campaign to get North Korea to denuclearize? Second issue is Syria. And this is where, we don't agree with Russia on a ton of things, but it is an area of agreement, and that is fighting ISIS. We have an area in Syria that has had a ceasefire that's held for the most part since July. The U.S. and coalition partners don't get enough credit for that. That's helped humanitarian aid get into that part of Syria. It's helped save lives. So the U.S. is looking to expand to other ceasefire zones in Syria. If we can have a conversation with the Russians about that and making that happen, that might be useful.
I see very interesting answers there. Are the Russians resisting this overture? Would you characterize it that way?
In terms of the overture of an additional ceasefire zone?
The topics to sit down and discuss.
Yeah.
Is the expression out of Moscow that we'll talk to you, but only about A, C, and D, and not D?
Look, I think sometimes they tend to, and I don't want to get ahead of the president, and I don't want to get ahead of Secretary Tillerson and what may or may not happen. But Russia certainly has an interest in sitting down and talking with us. We have an interest in sitting down and talking with them too, but it has to be results-oriented. And that's one of the things that Secretary Tillerson talks a lot about. It can't be just talking for the sake of talking. There has to be something that comes of it. If we can get some more assurances on North Korea, that would be worthwhile.
Okay,
if we can get assurances on Syria, same thing.
Yeah, you mentioned this twice now. Here is what the Secretary said last night.
Okay.
It's the audio portion. We'll play it for our viewers now.
We're working with the Russians, as you know, in a number of very difficult areas. The view has been, if the two leaders are going to meet, is there something sufficiently substantive to talk about that would warrant a formal meeting? And so I would just say there's been no conclusion made on that. We continue to have conversations. If we're going to have a meeting, let's make sure it's a meaningful meeting.
So what I'm hearing from that and from you is that this, is it 50-50? Or how would you characterize it?
I'm not going to put a percentage on it. Russia tends to get out ahead of us sometimes and say that certain things are going to take place when we haven't fully committed to something yet. I'm not on the road with them.
Before the president left the country, he told Laura Ingraham it may happen.
Yeah.
And then when he was on Air Force One flying over the Pacific, he suggested that it would happen. I'm just trying to figure out what's the ultimate decider here, Heather.
Look, I don't know. It may happen. It may not happen. But we would need, I think, to get some assurances from Russia that there are areas where we can work together. We have a lot of areas of disagreement, but we have some very key areas where we can work together. But even if this meeting does not happen, we have lots of conversations. The new ambassador to Russia was just meeting with Secretary Tillerson last week. We have a lot of avenues for conversations with that nation.
Okay, another point to be made here. If the president does meet with Vladimir Putin, will he bring up the election of last year?
That is an issue that often does come up. Our U.S. intelligence agencies have been very clear about Russian meddling in the election, and that's part of the reason that Congress put sanctions in place and the president signed those sanctions, because we recognize that Russia meddled in the election, and that's a conversation that continues to come up.
And how do the Russians respond when it does when it's broached?
I can't get too much into some of the private diplomatic conversations, Bill. I'm sorry, I know that's sort of a frustrating answer. I've not been in the room personally when that has come up. I've been in the room when other conversations have come up, talking about Syria, talking about other matters.
Because Putin shoots it down publicly.
Well, look, they are masters at spin, Bill. They are masters at spin, and that is just that's what Russia does. That's what other countries do as well.
Last topic. 3 aircraft carriers in the Pacific. Who are you speaking to with that move? Is it the North Koreans or is it the Chinese?
Well, I mean, look, that's a freedom of navigation operation, and that's something that the U.S. conducts all around the world, not just in that part of the world. We do that with our allies in Asia. That's something that we have done for decades and decades. Look, we have the ability, we have the right to do that under international law. That's something that hasn't changed, but that's something we have to show that we are ready, and our military has to be ready if that is necessary. But with regard to North Korea, Bill, I want to be clear, diplomacy is the preferred approach. The Secretary and the President had a good meeting with President Xi last night. I think you've seen that. We've gotten some assurances from China that they are going to do more on the issue of North Korea. They can do more. All nations can do more. But we're getting some positive assurances from China that they recognize the threat that North Korea presents, not just to the region, but to the entire world. And we think now that they see North Korea as more of a thorn in their side as opposed to an asset. So things are shifting.
I'm out of time, but I appreciate yours. Come on back,
all right,
okay?
Bill. All right,
Heather
good to see
Nauert
you.
there
Thanks.
in Washington. Thank you.
All right, tax reform taking top priority on Capitol Hill today. House Speaker Paul Ryan explains how the GOP tax bill stands to not only benefit middle-income taxpayers, but also businesses. That's ahead at 10:30. Plus, new controversy over the Star-Spangled Banner. Why the California chapter of the NAACP says it should no longer be our national anthem.